The day Rowan Mercer walked back into the towering glass headquarters of Halcyon Industries, nobody recognized the man they had once abandoned. 5 years earlier, he had stood in the rain outside a hospital with his 3-year-old daughter asleep in his arms and nowhere left to go. His face had been hollow from exhaustion, his bank account empty, and his heart shattered beyond repair. The people who were supposed to be his family had turned their backs on him when he needed them most. They had watched him fall and convinced themselves he would never get back up. But on this bright morning, sunlight poured through the building's enormous windows as Rowan stepped out of a sleek black car worth more than the house he once lost. The security guards straightened instantly. Executives rushed toward the entrance. Employees whispered in amazement. Because the broken single father they had left for dead was now the billionaire who owned everything. Before we continue, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the Dad Chronicles if you believe kindness and second chances can change someone's life. Stories like this remind us that even in our darkest moments, hope can still find a way back. 5 years earlier, Rowan's life had looked completely different. He wasn't rich. He wasn't powerful. He wasn't even successful. He was simply a devoted father doing his best. Every morning before sunrise, Rowan would wake up in the small house he shared with his wife, Selena, and their little daughter, Ivy. He worked long hours repairing industrial machinery while spending every spare minute with his child. His hands were always covered in grease, but his daughter never cared. To her, he was the strongest man in the world. Then tragedy struck without warning. Selena died in a terrible highway accident while returning home from a business conference. One phone call destroyed everything. The grief nearly consumed Rowan. Some nights he sat on the kitchen floor after Ivy had fallen asleep, staring at family photographs until dawn. The silence in the house became unbearable. Every room carried memories. But despite his heartbreak, Rowan kept moving forward because his daughter needed him. He learned how to braid hair from online videos. He packed school lunches. He attended every parent meeting. He comforted Ivy through nightmares while hiding his own tears. For 2 years, he carried the weight alone. Then disaster struck again. The manufacturing company where Rowan worked suddenly closed after financial scandals surfaced. Hundreds lost their jobs overnight. Within months, his savings disappeared. Medical bills from Ivy's recurring asthma treatments drained what little money remained. The mortgage payments fell behind. Debt collectors began calling. The pressure became suffocating. Desperate, Rowan turned to the only people he thought might help, his late wife's family. The Hawthorns were wealthy, influential, and respected throughout the city. Selena's father had built a successful business empire over decades. Their sprawling estate looked more like a resort than a home. Rowan arrived carrying hope. He left carrying humiliation. The family welcomed Ivy warmly but viewed Rowan differently. Behind polite smiles, they blamed him for their daughter's choices. They had never approved of Selena marrying a mechanic instead of someone from their social circle. When Rowan asked for temporary help until he found work, they responded with cold sympathy. They offered advice. They offered criticism. They offered judgment. But they refused real help. One by one, doors closed. Weeks later, the bank foreclosed on his home. The moving truck arrived on a gray afternoon. Rowan packed his entire life into a handful of boxes while Ivy watched quietly from the porch. That evening, he drove to the Hawthorne estate one last time. He wasn't asking for money anymore. He simply needed somewhere safe for his daughter while he rebuilt their lives. The answer was no. The massive gates closed behind him as rain began falling from the darkening sky. At that moment, standing alone with his little girl sleeping against his shoulder, Rowan felt completely defeated. The world had forgotten him. But fate had not. That night, he parked outside a 24-hour diner and spent his last dollars on coffee. Across the room sat an elderly man struggling to breathe. Most customers ignored him. Rowan didn't. Years of caring for his daughter had taught him to notice distress immediately. He rushed over and called emergency services. The elderly man survived. What Rowan didn't know was that the stranger was Elias Voss, a retired entrepreneur whose private investment company quietly controlled billions in assets. During recovery, Elias learned Rowan's story. He learned about the foreclosure. He learned about the sacrifices. He learned about the family that abandoned him. Most importantly, he learned about Rowan's unwavering devotion to his daughter. Instead of offering charity, Elias offered opportunity. He invited Rowan to help manage a struggling manufacturing startup he had recently acquired. The company was weeks from collapse. Most people saw failure. Rowan saw potential. He accepted immediately. The work was brutal. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Rowan slept in cheap apartments and worked 18-hour shifts. He studied business at night while Ivy slept beside him. Every mistake became a lesson. Every setback became motivation. Employees noticed something unusual about him. Unlike other executives, Rowan understood struggle. He remembered what it felt like to choose between groceries and bills. He remembered the shame of asking for help. He remembered being invisible. Slowly, the company transformed. Efficiency improved. Profits returned. New contracts arrived. Investors took notice. Within 3 years, the failing startup became one of the fastest-growing manufacturing firms in the country. Elias Voss watched proudly. Then, shortly before his death, he made a decision that stunned the business world. He transferred controlling ownership of his investment empire to Rowan. Analysts called it shocking. Competitors called it reckless. But Elias understood something others didn't. Character creates lasting success. And Rowan possessed more character than anyone he had ever met. Overnight, Rowan became one of the youngest billionaires in the nation. Yet wealth never changed him. He still drove Ivy to school. He still attended every recital. He still remembered the pain that had shaped him. Meanwhile, the Hawthorne family faced troubles of their own. Poor leadership and risky decisions had pushed Halcyon Industries toward bankruptcy. The company that once symbolized their power was collapsing. Creditors demanded payment. Investors fled. The family desperately searched for buyers. Eventually, only one serious offer remained. The acquisition paperwork arrived quietly. The Hawthornes never imagined who stood behind it. Then came the meeting. The boardroom fell silent when the doors opened. Executives exchanged confused looks. Several members of the Hawthorne family nearly dropped their documents. There stood Rowan Mercer. Calm. Confident. Successful. The very man they had discarded. Years of guilt suddenly filled the room. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew where to look. Because the evidence of their mistake stood directly before them. Rowan glanced around the table. He recognized every face. Every person who had once decided he wasn't worth helping. Memories flooded back. The foreclosure notices. The sleepless nights. The hunger. The humiliation. But something unexpected happened. He felt no hatred. Only peace. Success had healed wounds that revenge never could. The acquisition proceeded smoothly. Within hours, ownership transferred completely. Halcyon Industries belonged to Rowan. Employees feared massive layoffs. Rumors spread throughout the company. Many expected Rowan to punish those who had wronged him. Instead, he surprised everyone. The next morning, he gathered thousands of employees in the central atrium. Sunlight streamed through the enormous skylights. Workers waited nervously. Rowan stepped onto the stage. He looked across the crowd and saw ordinary people trying to support their families, just as he once had. Many depended on those paychecks. Many carried invisible struggles. And Rowan understood them. He announced that no jobs would be eliminated. He announced expanded healthcare benefits. He announced educational assistance programs for employees' children. Tears appeared throughout the audience. For the first time in years, people felt hopeful. The applause seemed endless. News of his decision spread rapidly. Journalists praised his leadership. Business experts called it visionary. But Rowan simply called it human. Months later, Halcyon Industries experienced record growth. Employee satisfaction soared. Profits increased dramatically. The company became a model for compassionate leadership. One afternoon, Rowan received a request. The Hawthorne family wanted to meet privately. Curiosity led him to accept. The meeting took place in a quiet conference room. Age and hardship had changed them. The confidence they once carried was gone. Regret had replaced pride. One by one, they apologized. Not for losing their company. Not for their financial mistakes. But for abandoning him when he needed family most. The room grew emotional. Some cried openly. Others struggled to speak. For years, they had carried the burden of their choices. Rowan listened carefully. Then he thought about Ivy. He thought about the lessons he wanted her to learn. Bitterness would teach nothing. Forgiveness would teach everything. So he forgave them. Not because they deserved it. Not because the past could be erased. But because freedom begins when resentment ends. The years ahead brought healing. Relationships slowly rebuilt. Trust returned gradually. And through it all, Rowan remained focused on what mattered most. His daughter. Ivy grew into a remarkable young woman. Kind. Intelligent. Compassionate. One evening, years after the acquisition, father and daughter stood overlooking the city skyline from the balcony of their home. The sunset painted the clouds gold and crimson. The same city that had once witnessed their lowest moment now celebrated their success. Ivy asked how he survived everything. Rowan smiled. He remembered the rain. The diner. The rejection. The fear. Then he remembered every person who had shown kindness along the way. He understood that resilience wasn't about never falling. It was about refusing to stay down. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the Dad Chronicles. Your support helps keep these inspiring stories alive and allows more people to discover messages of hope, forgiveness, and perseverance. Special request: comment below with the word resilience if you believe life's greatest comebacks are born from its hardest struggles. As darkness settled beyond the balcony, Rowan looked at the city lights sparkling below and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Complete peace. The family that abandoned him had once believed his story was over. They thought his chapter had ended in failure. What they never understood was that some people don't break when life knocks them down. Some people become stronger. Some people become wiser. And sometimes, the man left behind in the storm returns not with revenge in his heart, but with grace in his hands. Because true success is not measured by how high you rise. It is measured by how much kindness you still carry after surviving the fall. And that is why the single father they left for dead became something far greater than a billionaire. He became a man whose strength changed lives forever.